Black CEO laughed at in a car showroom 15 minutes later. She bought the dealership. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. In the gleaming showroom of a high-end car dealership, Alicia King walked in, dressed simply but exuding an undeniable air of authority. Her presence commanded attention, yet the glances she received were anything but welcoming. As she approached the counter to inquire about a luxury car, the salesman, James, looked her up and down with a smirk. "You sure you're in the right place?" he sneered, his voice laced with contempt. "This is a high-end showroom, not some cheap lot. I doubt you could afford anything here." The words hung in the air, stinging with their cruel insinuation. Alicia, however, didn't flinch. She knew exactly what he was doing. The room fell silent as the tension escalated. The other customers, most of whom were white, glanced around nervously. Some whispered to each other, their eyes darting between Alicia and the sales team. It was clear she didn't belong in their eyes, just by the way she looked, dressed casually, and walked with no entourage. But Alicia wasn't the type to let this slide. She had been underestimated before, and she was ready to prove them wrong. Just as James arrogantly told her to leave, Alicia's phone buzzed. Her assistant had triggered the protocol. Her voice, calm yet firm, cut through the tension as she calmly placed her phone back in her pocket. "You don't know who I am, do you?" she asked, locking eyes with him. James was stunned, his smirk faltering. Alicia wasn't just a customer. She was the CEO of one of the largest private enterprises in the country. Alicia was no ordinary woman walking into this dealership. Moments after the insult, Alicia turned the tables completely. Watch how she dismantles the very system of elitism and racism within the walls of this showroom. The power shift happens in the blink of an eye. But this is only the beginning. What will Alicia do next? Stay tuned to witness the consequences that come when you treat the wrong person like an outsider. Alicia wasn't going to take this lightly. She was about to show them just how wrong they were about her. Moments after Alicia's quiet yet firm response, the showroom fell into an uneasy silence, the air thick with tension. James, still trying to recover from his earlier insult, fumbled with the keys on his desk, pretending to be distracted. But Alicia wasn't finished. She didn't just stand there and take it. No, she was ready to take action, to turn the tables on these people who thought they could judge her based on her appearance. Without saying a word, she calmly picked up her phone and dialed her assistant. As the line connected, she spoke with the same cool, collected demeanor she always carried in business meetings. "Activate protocol," she said, her voice calm but unyielding. The response on the other end of the line was immediate. Her assistant didn't hesitate. "Protocol activated, ma'am," came the reply, a tone of efficiency and professionalism that matched Alicia's own. Alicia slid the phone back into her bag, her eyes still locked on James, who was now visibly uncomfortable under her steady gaze. It wasn't a challenge, not a shout, but a silent power that hung between them like a storm waiting to break. As Alicia stood there, the customers in the showroom slowly began to take notice, whispers starting to swirl around the room. They had seen the exchange, and many were starting to realize that Alicia wasn't just any customer. She was someone who had the power to change the course of events with a single word. In the distance, the manager, who had been watching from his office, was now stepping toward the floor, sensing the shift in energy. James, still trying to maintain control of the situation, made the mistake of repeating his earlier comment. "If you're not going to buy anything, you need to leave," he said, his tone cold and dismissive. Alicia, however, wasn't fazed. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm not here to leave, James," she said quietly. "I'm here to take over." With that, Alicia made a simple gesture with her hand, signaling the beginning of the plan she had set in motion. Her assistant, already on top of things, had already started contacting the dealership's corporate office, setting the wheels of change into motion. Alicia didn't need to raise her voice, and she certainly didn't need to threaten. The power she had in that moment was far more dangerous than any words could be. The employees, still oblivious to the storm that was about to hit them, continued their tasks, unaware of the corporate meeting already being set in motion above them. Alicia took a step back and leaned against one of the nearby cars, her presence now undeniably commanding. The manager had reached the floor, his face an uncertain mix of curiosity and concern, but Alicia wasn't interested in his discomfort. She was interested in the shift that was about to occur, one that would reshape the future of this showroom and its management forever. The atmosphere in the room had changed. No one was quite sure what to expect. But one thing was certain. Alicia King wasn't someone to be underestimated. Not now, not ever. As Alicia stood there, her calm and unshakable presence filling the showroom, the manager, finally approaching her, hesitated. He had seen enough to know this wasn't just another disgruntled customer. Alicia's composed demeanor, the way she seemed to radiate control without uttering a single word, made him uneasy. He stepped up to her slowly, his tone forced and trying to mask his discomfort. "I'm afraid we can't accommodate your needs here," he said, his voice faltering slightly, betraying his uncertainty. Alicia didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She simply looked at him, her gaze steady, piercing. "You've already made that clear, but I'm not leaving," she replied softly, but with an authority that left no room for negotiation. The manager looked around, hoping someone would step in, but the customers were watching, their eyes shifting between him and Alicia, sensing something was happening, something bigger than they could comprehend. The tension in the room was thick, and it was becoming apparent that Alicia wasn't going to let this slide. James, still standing in the background, shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence now replaced by a nervous energy. He took a step forward, trying to salvage the situation. "You should leave," he repeated, his voice now tinged with frustration. "You're causing a scene, and we don't have time for this." Alicia's eyes narrowed slightly as she took a step closer to him, her voice never rising, but cutting through the air like a blade. "You don't tell me what to do, James," she said, her tone cold and deliberate. "You don't tell anyone what to do, especially not in my space." The room grew still. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning, and the murmurs of the customers who were beginning to realize who Alicia truly was. It wasn't just the power in her words that struck them. It was the calmness with which she wielded that power, the way she effortlessly took control of the situation without raising her voice or causing a scene. She wasn't playing by their rules. She was rewriting them. The manager swallowed, his hands trembling as he pulled out his phone, likely to call security. But before he could do so, Alicia's phone rang again. She glanced at it, then turned back to him. "Before you call anyone," she said, her voice smooth but full of weight, "I suggest you reconsider. I own this place now." The words hung in the air, impossible to ignore. The manager's face went pale as the realization hit him like a freight train. He had no idea who Alicia was until now, but it was clear that he was about to feel the full force of his mistake. Alicia didn't need to say anything else. Her assistant was already setting the wheels in motion, contacting corporate, pulling strings that would change the course of this dealership's future. The manager, still frozen in shock, stood there, unsure of what to do next. The rest of the showroom, which had once been a place of prestige and control, now felt like a courtroom, where Alicia was the judge, and everyone else was waiting for the verdict. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She had already won. The manager, now visibly sweating, stood frozen, his phone still in hand, unsure of what to do next. He had heard Alicia's words, but the gravity of the situation was only now beginning to sink in. Alicia didn't need to say anything more. The damage had already been done. The wheels of her plan were set in motion, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. As the reality of her statement began to resonate in the room, a hushed silence fell over the showroom. James, still standing nearby, shifted nervously, glancing at the other employees, as if expecting them to come to his defense. But no one moved. Everyone was too absorbed in the unfolding scene, too captivated by Alicia's power and poise. Alicia's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't her assistant. It was a notification from the corporate office. She glanced at the screen, and a small, satisfied smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Her assistant had done their job. Alicia raised her eyes to meet the manager's gaze, her expression unwavering. "You can either make this easy," she said, her voice calm, "or you can make it harder. It's entirely up to you." The manager, still paralyzed by the shock of realizing he was in the presence of someone far more powerful than he had ever imagined, hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly stepped back. He didn't say a word, but his eyes betrayed his panic. James, who had been watching the exchange, now spoke up, his voice shaking. "This is crazy," he muttered under his breath. "She's not supposed to." "Not supposed to?" Alicia interrupted, her eyes flashing with authority. "Who says what I'm supposed to do, James?" Her voice was cool but firm, leaving no room for argument. The showroom had become a battleground, but Alicia was in control now, and it was clear that the others were simply waiting for her next move. The other customers, who had been whispering among themselves, now stood silently, witnessing this unexpected shift of power. Alicia had been wronged in this space, but she was no longer a victim. She was the force that was about to dismantle the very system that had wronged her. The manager's face drained of color as he watched Alicia approach him, her every step measured and deliberate. Without a word, Alicia held out her hand, palm up. The manager hesitated, then handed over the dealership's keys, his fingers trembling. Alicia took them without a second glance. The showroom was now hers, and it was a matter of seconds before the ownership change would be final. She had already made the call. The corporate office had just given her the green light to take control. As the manager backed away, his posture hunched, defeated, Alicia turned to face the employees and the customers who had been silently watching. "This place," she said, her voice carrying through the now silent showroom, "is mine now, and I will run it how it should have been run all along, fair, equal, and without discrimination." The room was still, but Alicia could feel the shift. The power had truly changed hands. It wasn't about the cars, the money, or the prestige. It was about proving a point that Alicia had made clear without raising her voice. The showroom, once a symbol of elitism, would now be a symbol of change. As Alicia stood there, the keys to the dealership now in her hand, she could feel the weight of the moment. The showroom, once a place of elitism and privilege, was now silent, the tension palpable in the air. The manager, defeated and unsure of how to proceed, stood with his head lowered. Alicia glanced around the room at the other employees, their faces a mixture of fear, disbelief, and confusion. James, still frozen at the back, tried to gather his composure, but it was clear that he had underestimated her from the start. Alicia, however, was far from finished. She turned to the customers who had been silently watching the scene unfold. "This," she said, her voice steady and commanding, "is a prime example of how the system has failed. This place, this showroom, was built on assumptions, on treating people based on their appearance, their skin color, and their status, but no more. Today, that ends." She paused for a moment, allowing her words to sink in. The silence was deafening as everyone in the room absorbed what she was saying. Alicia didn't need to shout or scream to make her point. Her mere presence commanded attention. She turned to the manager again, her eyes unwavering. "You've humiliated me, but you've also shown the world exactly what's wrong with spaces like this," she continued. "You've proven that the system here is broken, and I'm here to fix it." The manager opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. Alicia wasn't waiting for his apology or his excuses. She had already made her decision. She wasn't just a customer, she was the owner now. Alicia's assistant, who had been silently monitoring the situation from her phone, stepped forward and handed her a folder. "Everything's in place, ma'am," the assistant said, her voice calm and efficient. Alicia took the folder without a word and handed it to the manager. "These are the official papers transferring ownership. You'll sign them, or I'll have my legal team handle it for you." The manager hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking nervously between the papers and Alicia. He was no longer in control, and he knew it. Slowly, he took the folder and signed the documents, his hand trembling slightly. Alicia took the signed papers and handed them off to her assistant, who immediately began making calls to finalize the transition. Alicia's gaze swept over the showroom again, this time with a look of determination. "This dealership is mine," she said, her voice full of quiet authority. "And it will be run with respect for every person who walks through that door, no matter who they are or where they come from. Discrimination has no place here." The customers, who had been watching in awe, began to nod in approval, some even clapping softly. Alicia had made a statement, and it wasn't just about the cars or the money. It was about change, about fairness, and about making sure that the wrongs of the past were never repeated. As the employees, now clearly aware of the new reality, looked on, Alicia gave them one final look. "I expect professionalism, respect, and equality from every single person who works here. You've all seen what happens when you underestimate me. Don't make that mistake again." She turned and walked out of the showroom, leaving behind a room full of people who were now forced to confront the consequences of their actions. Alicia had taken control, and there was no going back. As Alicia walked out of the showroom, she could hear the soft murmurs of the customers behind her, still processing the events that had just unfolded. It was as though the world had shifted, and they were now seeing things for what they really were: uncomfortable truths about bias and discrimination that had been buried beneath the polished surface of this luxury dealership. Alicia didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had made her point, and now she was ready to take the next step. Her assistant, still by her side, handed her a cup of coffee as they stepped into the car. Alicia took a sip, her mind already working through the next phase of her plan. As she sat in the back seat, she glanced at the papers her assistant had handed her earlier, the ones that officially transferred the dealership into her name. The weight of the signature on those papers wasn't lost on her. It wasn't just about owning property. It was about taking ownership of something much bigger. It was about breaking down the systems of prejudice that had taken root in places like this. "Everything is moving forward, ma'am," her assistant said, breaking her thoughts. "The corporate office has already been notified, and the legal team is handling the final paperwork. We're good to go." Alicia nodded, her eyes narrowing slightly as she considered the road ahead. "Good," she said, her voice low but steady. "Make sure to inform the board. I want them to know what happened today. And I want them to understand that this is just the beginning. We're not just buying properties or businesses, we're changing lives. We're making sure people are treated with dignity and respect, no matter their background, no matter their appearance." The assistant nodded in agreement. "Understood, ma'am." They drove in silence for a few moments, the weight of Alicia's words hanging in the air. The city outside the window was moving at its usual pace, but for Alicia, everything felt different now. She had crossed a line today, one she would never go back from. The next day, Alicia stood in front of the dealership again, but this time, it was hers. The new signage had gone up, and everything looked different. The showroom, the cars, the staff, all of it was hers to rebuild, to reshape into something better. She walked inside, her heels clicking on the floor, and she felt the power in her every step. She was ready. The employees, many of them still in shock from the previous day's events, watched her enter. They knew this was no ordinary business owner. Alicia's presence was commanding, and they could see that she wasn't just here to collect a paycheck or run a business. She was here to change the very culture of this place. As she walked through the showroom, she stopped at each station, each desk, her gaze sharp and calculating. "I trust you all know the changes that are coming," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "There will be new standards, new expectations, and above all, there will be accountability. If you want to keep your jobs here, you'll treat everyone with respect, no exceptions." The employees exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to respond. Alicia wasn't here to be liked. She was here to make sure things ran the way they should. And for those who couldn't handle it, there was the door. "We're not just selling cars," Alicia continued, her voice cold and unwavering. "We're creating a space where people can come and feel like they belong. If that's not something you can get behind, you're free to leave. But if you stay, you work for a company that doesn't tolerate discrimination. You work for a company that treats people as they are, not how they look or where they come from." The silence that followed her words was heavy, but it was the kind of silence that marked the beginning of real change. The kind of silence that came before a revolution. Alicia turned and walked to her office, her mind already planning the next steps. The battle had been won, but the real work was just beginning. The following day, Alicia returned to the dealership with a sense of determination that filled the air around her. She had set the stage for change, but today was the day she would make it real. The showroom was already open, the staff in place, but there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. The tension from yesterday's events hadn't fully dissipated, and Alicia could feel the eyes of the employees on her as she entered. She moved through the showroom, her heels clicking purposefully on the sleek marble floors, each step echoing like a subtle command. The employees, though still processing the shock of her takeover, couldn't help but watch her every move. Alicia was no longer just the CEO of a company, she was a force to be reckoned with, and they knew it. "Good morning," she said as she walked past several of the employees, her voice sharp, yet controlled. She stopped by the front desk where one of the salespeople was standing, trying to avoid eye contact. "Are we ready for the new system?" Alicia asked, her gaze steady, not demanding, but unwavering. The salesperson nodded quickly, but Alicia could see the unease in his eyes. "Good," she said, her lips pressing into a tight line. "Because today we start implementing the changes. No more backroom deals, no more disrespect. I want everyone to understand exactly what we're doing here." Alicia's voice carried, and she made sure that everyone within earshot could hear her message loud and clear. She wasn't here to make friends. She was here to transform this dealership from the ground up. She continued through the showroom, her eyes scanning the cars, the staff, the customers. Nothing escaped her attention. Alicia had a plan, and today was the first step in executing it. As she made her way to the back office, her assistant followed closely behind, a stack of paperwork in hand. The paperwork had been prepared for the final phase of the transition, the part that would lock in her control of the dealership for good. "The press release is ready to go out, ma'am," her assistant said, handing her a folder. "We've also got the new diversity and inclusion policy, which will be mandatory for every employee here." Alicia took the folder without a word and glanced over the documents, making sure everything was in order. "Good. Send it out immediately," she instructed. As she sat behind her new desk, she could already feel the weight of the responsibility she was taking on. But it wasn't just about the dealership. It was about setting a new standard for every place of business that operated with prejudice. Alicia wasn't going to let anyone forget what had happened here. Not ever. She picked up the phone, dialed the corporate headquarters, and began making arrangements for the next steps. She was going to ensure that every one of her dealerships operated with the values she had just implemented. But it wasn't just about business, it was about people. The people she was empowering, the people she was giving opportunities to, and most importantly, the people she was protecting from being treated the way she had been. Alicia had been disrespected, but now, she was the one calling the shots. She wasn't just changing the dealership, she was changing the industry. When she hung up the phone, she looked around her office one last time, her eyes filled with resolve. "This is just the beginning," she muttered to herself. "I'm not stopping here. I will make sure the world sees exactly what happens when you underestimate me." The following week, Alicia arrived at the dealership earlier than usual. The sun had barely risen, but the showroom was already bustling with activity. The staff, now fully aware of the new expectations, moved with a renewed sense of purpose. There was a different energy in the air, an energy that Alicia had worked hard to cultivate. As she walked through the showroom, she noticed the changes were already beginning to take hold. The new policies were being implemented, the employees were more professional, and the once tense atmosphere had been replaced with one of quiet efficiency. Alicia was pleased, but she knew this was just the beginning. She had set the foundation, but it was up to her to keep the momentum going. She made her way to the front desk, where she found James, the salesman who had made the original mistake of underestimating her. He was standing a little straighter today, but still noticeably nervous as she approached. Alicia didn't say anything at first, just gave him a pointed look. James shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "You seem different today," Alicia said, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight. "I trust you've been adjusting to the new guidelines?" James swallowed hard, nodding quickly. "Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Everything is being done according to your instructions." Alicia didn't respond immediately. Instead, she surveyed the showroom again, her eyes lingering on each section, each employee. She could see they were making progress, but there was more to be done. "Good," Alicia finally said, her voice cool. But I need to make something clear. This isn't just about following orders. It's about creating a culture that values everyone. There's no room for shortcuts, no room for bias. Not here, not anymore. James nodded quickly, his eyes now focused on the floor. Alicia's gaze softened, just slightly. I know this is a big adjustment for all of you, but I promise you, it'll be worth it. You'll see that treating people with dignity isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. Your customers will notice. They already are. Alicia turned and walked toward the back office, her assistant following closely behind. As they entered her office, she sat down at her desk and glanced at the papers in front of her. The work wasn't finished. In fact, it was just getting started. Alicia had bigger plans for this dealership, and she had every intention of making them happen. The real test was still ahead, ensuring that the changes she had set in motion would be sustained. She didn't just want a dealership that was profitable. She wanted a dealership that was a true reflection of her values: fairness, respect, and integrity. The phone rang, breaking her concentration. Alicia picked it up and spoke with a calm authority. Yes, this is Alicia King. What's the status of the diversity training? She asked. Good. I want to make sure it's not just a one-time session. I want regular check-ins. Keep it consistent. She hung up the phone, a satisfied smile tugging at the corner of her lips. The changes she had started were becoming permanent, and there was no turning back now. She stood up from her desk and walked back into the showroom, where she saw James again. This time, he was helping a young couple, treating them with the respect and professionalism that Alicia had insisted upon. For the first time, he looked confident. Alicia watched for a moment, then nodded to herself. She had made a difference, and that difference was just the beginning. As the days passed, Alicia's influence over the dealership grew stronger. The employees, once wary and resistant, were now starting to embrace the changes she had implemented. The new diversity training sessions had become a regular part of the routine, and employees were taking them seriously. The initial shock of Alicia's takeover had worn off, and in its place was a sense of unity and purpose. Alicia continued to walk through the showroom every morning, her presence a constant reminder of the transformation taking place. She didn't need to say much anymore. The atmosphere had already shifted, and the employees knew the expectations. But Alicia wasn't one to rest on her laurels. She knew that lasting change wasn't something that could be achieved in just a few weeks. She had to keep pushing, keep improving. Her next step was to meet with the corporate team to discuss expanding the changes she had started at this dealership to all of her other properties. She couldn't let this be a one-off success. It needed to be a model for the entire company. As she sat at the conference table with the executives, she laid out her plan. This is about more than just improving our numbers, she said, her voice confident and clear. This is about building a brand that stands for something. A brand that doesn't just profit, but does so by doing the right thing. We've made a start here, but I want this to be company-wide. I want every dealership to operate on the same principles of fairness, equality, and respect. The executives listened carefully, some nodding in agreement, others more cautious. Alicia knew she had to convince them, but she had the data to back her up. Since the changes were implemented here, she continued, our customer satisfaction ratings have gone up by 20%. Employee retention has improved, and we're seeing higher sales numbers. People want to work for a company that values them, and customers want to buy from a company that treats them with respect. The numbers don't lie. The room was quiet for a moment as the executives exchanged looks. Then one of them, a senior VP, spoke up. You've made a lot of changes, Alicia, and the results are impressive, but we've been doing things a certain way for a long time. This isn't going to be easy to roll out company-wide. Alicia smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. I didn't say it would be easy, but I'm telling you, it's necessary. We either evolve, or we get left behind. And I'm not about to let that happen. The VP nodded slowly, and the rest of the room seemed to come to a quiet agreement. Alicia had made her case, and it was clear that her vision for the future was one that they couldn't ignore. By the end of the meeting, plans were already in motion to roll out the new policies across all dealerships. Alicia's vision was becoming a reality, and she wasn't stopping here. As she left the meeting, a sense of pride washed over her. She had fought for change, And now, it was happening. The journey was far from over, but she knew she was on the right path. She couldn't help but smile to herself as she thought about how far she had come, how far they had all come, and what was yet to come. Weeks passed, and Alicia's transformation of the dealership began to ripple across the entire company. The other locations had started implementing the new policies, and Alicia was visiting each one to ensure they adhered to the standards she had set. With each visit, her presence seemed to make a stronger impact. The staff was more motivated, the customers more satisfied, and the company's reputation steadily improving. However, Alicia knew that real success didn't just come from changing policies, it came from changing minds. That was where the real challenge lay. As the corporate-wide overhaul continued, Alicia found herself more frequently in board meetings, speaking with executives, listening to concerns, and adjusting plans as needed. There was resistance from some, but Alicia had learned long ago that resistance was merely an opportunity to prove the worth of her vision. One morning, while reviewing the latest quarterly reports, Alicia's assistant brought her an update on the company's progress. "The customer satisfaction rate has increased again," the assistant said, handing her the documents, "and employee turnover is at its lowest point in years. There's also been a noticeable improvement in sales across the board." Alicia smiled to herself, feeling the weight of her hard work starting to pay off. But there was still one major challenge ahead: the press. Alicia had kept a low profile during the transformation, focusing on internal changes, but now the media was starting to catch wind of the shifts taking place. Some were curious, others skeptical, and a few had already started to ask questions about how Alicia, a black woman in a traditionally white-dominated industry, had managed to turn the dealership around so quickly. Alicia knew the media was about to dig deeper, and she had to be ready. She wasn't going to let her achievements be overshadowed by questions about her identity or how she achieved success. She had worked too hard to get where she was, to let anyone diminish her efforts. The next day, a reporter from a major news outlet reached out for an interview. Alicia didn't hesitate to accept. Sitting across from the reporter in a sleek conference room, she felt the familiar calmness wash over her as the questions began. "How have you managed to change the culture of a company like this so quickly?" the reporter asked. Alicia leaned back in her chair, her eyes steady. "It wasn't about changing the company overnight," she said, her voice firm and clear. "It was about changing the mindset. You can't expect things to improve if you're still thinking the same way. I focused on creating an environment where everyone, employees, customers, and leadership, felt respected, valued, and heard." The reporter pressed further. "But you're a black woman in an industry where that's rare. Do you think your race has played a role in your success?" Alicia didn't flinch. "My race doesn't define my success," she said, her voice unwavering. "What defines my success is my ability to lead, my ability to make tough decisions, and my commitment to creating a fair and equitable space for everyone. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from, what matters is what you can do." Alicia's words hung in the air for a moment, the room quiet, except for the sound of the reporter scribbling notes. She knew this interview wasn't just about telling her story, it was about challenging the narrative. She wasn't here to fit into someone else's box. She was here to create her own, and it was one that was built on respect, integrity, and fairness. As the interview ended, Alicia felt a sense of accomplishment. The journey was far from over, but she had already proven her point. Success wasn't about fitting the mold, it was about breaking it. The media coverage of Alicia's success grew rapidly in the weeks following her interview. It wasn't just about the dealership anymore. The world was beginning to take notice of how she was transforming an entire industry, one that had been entrenched in old biases for far too long. As Alicia continued to visit her other locations, overseeing the implementation of new policies and ensuring her standards of equity and respect were maintained, the company's reputation skyrocketed. But with the rising visibility came more scrutiny. Some media outlets started to delve into Alicia's background, digging into her life before she became the CEO of the dealership chain. Most of it was positive, but there were a few articles questioning whether she was just a token success in an industry that had historically been closed off to people like her. Alicia was not fazed by these critiques. She had learned long ago to ignore distractions and keep her focus on what truly mattered. She knew her worth, and she knew that no one could take away what she had built. One evening, after a long day of meetings and planning, Alicia sat alone in her office, reviewing the latest performance reports. The numbers were astounding. Customer satisfaction was at an all-time high, employee retention was up, and her sales had exceeded projections by nearly 30%. Alicia allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She had proven the doubters wrong. But she knew this was just the beginning. There was more to be done. She wanted to make sure that the culture she was creating didn't just stop at her dealerships. She wanted this change to extend beyond her business and to influence the wider industry. That night, as she reviewed documents and made notes for the next phase of her plan, her assistant knocked and entered. "Ma'am, the board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning," the assistant said. Alicia looked up from her paperwork, nodding. "Good," she said, her voice steady. "We'll present the new expansion plan. It's time to take what we've done here and bring it to other industries. We're not just changing one company, we're changing the way business is done across the country." The next morning, at the board meeting, Alicia presented her proposal for a nationwide initiative to implement diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in all of her holdings. The room was filled with some of the most powerful executives in the business world, but Alicia wasn't intimidated. She knew what she was doing, and she knew the numbers would speak for themselves. "It's not just about being inclusive for the sake of it," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "It's about creating a business that thrives because it values all people, not just the ones who fit a certain mold. We've proven that it works here, and it will work everywhere else." There was a long silence in the room as the board members considered her words. Then, one by one, they nodded in agreement. Alicia had not only changed her company, she had changed the way they saw business. By the end of the meeting, her plan was approved. Alicia left the room, a sense of accomplishment settling in her chest. She had done what she set out to do. She had proven that the traditional ways of doing business, built on exclusion and bias, were not just outdated, they were wrong. Now, she was taking the next step in her journey, and there was no stopping her. In the months that followed, Alicia's influence continued to spread far beyond the walls of her dealerships. Her initiatives for diversity, equity, and inclusion became a model for other companies, and soon, her name was synonymous with leadership in the business world. Alicia was no longer just a CEO. She was a force for change, someone who had reshaped an entire industry. But even as her success grew, Alicia remained grounded. She never let the praise or the attention distract her from her mission. Each day, she focused on improving the company, building relationships with her employees, and making sure her customers knew that they were valued. One evening, after another long day of meetings and strategy sessions, Alicia sat in her office, staring out at the city lights. Her assistant knocked and entered, holding a phone. "Ma'am, there's someone on the line who wants to speak with you. It's the board of directors for one of the largest national retailers. They want to discuss something big." Alicia raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Put them through," she said, sitting up straighter in her chair. A moment later, the voice of the board chair came through the speakerphone, calm but urgent. "Ms. King, we've been watching your work for the past few months, and we're impressed by what you've achieved with your dealerships. We'd like to talk to you about leading a nationwide initiative to change how businesses handle diversity and inclusion." Alicia leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for, an opportunity to take her work to a scale she had never imagined. "I'm listening," she said, her voice steady. "We want to partner with you," the board chair continued. "We believe you're the right person to spearhead this movement. We've seen the impact you've had on your company, and we want to bring that kind of change to the rest of the retail industry." Alicia paused for a moment, weighing her options. She had built something remarkable, but this was bigger than just one company. It was an entire industry that needed change. "I'm in," she said, her voice unwavering. "Let's do it. But we're going to do it right. We're going to make sure this initiative isn't just about ticking boxes. We'll build a culture that truly values every person." Over the next several months, Alicia worked tirelessly, traveling the country, meeting with executives, and sharing her vision for an inclusive, equitable future. She wasn't just speaking about change, she was making it happen, one company at a time. And as Alicia's initiative gained traction, it sparked a larger movement. More and more companies began to realize the power of inclusivity not just for their bottom line but for their communities, their employees, and their customers. Alicia had become a trailblazer, not just in the automotive industry, but across the corporate world. She had broken barriers, defied expectations, and proven that when you lead with integrity and respect, success is inevitable. In the end, Alicia didn't just change one dealership or one industry. She changed the way the world did business, and in doing so, she left a legacy that would inspire generations of leaders to come.